They were the three most powerful men in Nazi Germany after Hitler himself. Göring, the drug-addicted art thief who lived like a king. Goebbels, the propaganda master who turned lies into a weapon. And Himmler, the architect of the Holocaust who orchestrated industrial murder. But what did these men actually do each day? How did they spend their waking hours while millions suffered and died? Were they working tirelessly for their twisted cause, or were their daily lives more bizarre and disconnected from reality than we imagine? Today, we're diving into the shocking routines of Hitler's Big Three and revealing what they really did behind closed doors. When people think of Nazi Germany's leadership, they often picture cold, calculating monsters. But Hermann Göring was different. He was flamboyant and vain, and he lived like a king while millions suffered. So what did Hitler's second-in-command actually do all day? Did he spend his time planning military operations and running the state? Or was he too busy collecting stolen art, changing uniforms, and feeding his massive drug addiction? Let's step into the bizarre, excessive world of one of history's most peculiar villains. Hermann Göring did not wake up early. Unlike the disciplined military officers around him, Göring loved luxury and comfort. He usually slept until 10 or 11 in the morning, sometimes even later. His bedroom at Hall, his massive estate north of Berlin, was decorated like a palace. Silk sheets, ornate furniture, paintings worth millions covering the walls. Everything was excessive. Everything was for show. When he finally woke up, his morning routine was elaborate. Servants would bring him breakfast in bed. Not a simple meal, but a feast. Eggs, sausages, pastries, multiple kinds of bread, jams, cheeses, and fruit. Göring was enormously overweight, especially in the later years of the war, and his appetite was legendary. He would eat for an hour, sometimes longer, while reading reports or newspapers. But here is something most people do not know. Göring was a drug addict. He had been hooked on morphine since the 1920s after being wounded during Hitler's failed beer hall putsch. Every morning, often multiple times throughout the day, he would inject himself with morphine or take pills containing various opiates. This addiction affected everything he did. It clouded his judgment. It made him erratic and contributed to his eventual downfall. His staff knew about it. Hitler knew about it. But Göring was too powerful, too close to the Führer, for anyone to do anything about it. After breakfast and his morning dose of drugs, Göring would spend an absurd amount of time choosing what to wear. This was not a simple matter of putting on a uniform. Göring had designed dozens of elaborate uniforms for himself, each more ridiculous than the last. White uniforms with gold braid, sky blue uniforms with medals covering every inch, and hunting outfits that looked like they belonged in a costume drama. He loved clothes the way some people love cars or jewelry. He would stand in front of mirrors, posing, adjusting his medals, making sure everything looked perfect. He wore makeup, he painted his nails, he used perfume. For a man who claimed to embody German military strength, he was remarkably concerned with his appearance in ways that his fellow Nazis would have considered unmanly. But no one dared mock him to his face. He was still Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, president of the Reichstag, and Hitler's designated successor. By noon, Göring might finally make his way to his office, though the word office is a generous description of what he actually did there. Unlike other Nazi leaders who were involved in detailed administrative work, Göring preferred grand gestures and big-picture thinking. He did not like paperwork. He did not like complicated details. He wanted to make dramatic decisions and then let other people handle the boring parts. As head of the Luftwaffe, Germany's Air Force, Göring was responsible for one of the most powerful military branches in the world. But he was a terrible administrator. He made promises he could not keep, approved unrealistic production goals, and ignored warnings from his own generals when they contradicted what he wanted to hear. When the Luftwaffe began to fail, especially during the Battle of Britain, and later when Allied bombers started destroying German cities, Göring blamed everyone but himself. He accused his pilots of cowardice, his engineers of incompetence, his intelligence officers of lying. He could not accept that his leadership was part of the problem. What Göring really loved was acquiring things: art, jewels, property, anything valuable. He used his position to... Göring looted art collections from across occupied Europe, especially from Jewish families who had been murdered or driven into exile. His agents confiscated paintings, sculptures, rare books, and furniture, sending the best pieces to Hall and his other properties. He accumulated one of the largest private art collections in Europe, worth hundreds of millions even by 1940s standards. Renaissance prints. His afternoons were often spent examining his latest acquisitions. He had art dealers and experts brought to him, showing off his treasures and boasting about his taste and knowledge. He saw himself as a Renaissance prince, a cultured man who appreciated beauty. The fact that most of this art was stolen from people who had been murdered did not seem to bother him at all. In his mind, he was rescuing these masterpieces and giving them a proper home. Hunting. Göring also loved hunting. He owned vast hunting estates and spent many afternoons shooting deer, boar, and other game. He dressed in elaborate hunting costumes, some of which he designed himself. These outfits were so theatrical that even other Nazis found them embarrassing. But Göring did not care. He wanted to look like a medieval nobleman, and he had the power to make that fantasy real. Lunch was another enormous meal, often lasting 2 hours or more. Göring would invite guests to dine with him, holding court like a king. He was a good storyteller and could be charming when he wanted to be. He would tell jokes, share war stories from World War I when he had been a flying ace, and gossip about other Nazi leaders. He loved being the center of attention. But beneath the charm was something monstrous. Göring was directly responsible for some of the worst crimes of the Nazi regime. He was one of the primary architects of the Holocaust. In 1941, he signed the order authorizing the final solution: the systematic murder of European Jews. He knew exactly what was happening in the concentration camps and death camps. He approved the logistics, the resources, the personnel needed to carry out genocide on an industrial scale. He was also responsible for the creation of the Gestapo, the secret police that terrorized Germany and occupied territories. He established the first concentration camps, beginning with Dachau in 1933. He oversaw the brutal suppression of any opposition to Nazi rule. People disappeared in the night, were tortured in basements, and were sent to camps where they died by the thousands. Yet Göring compartmentalized all of this horror. In his mind, he was simply doing what was necessary for Germany's greatness. He would spend his afternoons admiring stolen paintings, and then casually sign orders that would result in thousands of deaths. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. By evening, Göring was usually at his estate or at one of his many properties. Dinner was yet another lavish affair, multiple courses, the finest wines, servants attending to every need. He would often host parties, inviting foreign diplomats, artists, and even some of the aristocrats who had survived the Nazi rise to power. These gatherings were surreal. Champagne flowing, an orchestra playing, people dancing. While outside the estate, Germany was at war and people were dying. Göring loved showing off during these parties. He would give tours of his art collection, tell stories about his adventures, and bask in the admiration of his guests. He wanted to be loved, to be seen as sophisticated and powerful. He needed constant validation, constant attention. As the war turned against Germany, Göring's lifestyle became increasingly disconnected from reality, while German cities were being bombed to rubble. While soldiers were dying by the hundreds of thousands on the Eastern Front, Göring continued to live in luxury. He gained even more weight, became more dependent on drugs, and made increasingly poor decisions. His relationship with Hitler deteriorated. Hitler began to see Göring as weak, a failure who had let the Luftwaffe collapse. By 1943 and 1944, Göring was largely sidelined. He spent more time at his estates and less time in Berlin. He focused on his art collection, on hunting, on anything that would let him escape the reality that Germany was losing the war. In the final days of the war, Göring made a fatal miscalculation. When Hitler was trapped in his bunker in Berlin, Göring sent a telegram suggesting that he take over leadership of Germany since Hitler was cut off. Hitler saw this as betrayal and stripped Göring of all his positions. It was a humiliating end to decades of loyalty and service. After the war, Göring was captured by American forces. At the Nuremberg trials, he was the highest-ranking Nazi to stand trial. Unlike many of his co-defendants who appeared broken or who tried to deny their actions, Göring remained defiant. He was charming, articulate, and utterly unrepentant. He defended the Nazi regime, argued with prosecutors, and tried to portray himself as a soldier who had simply followed orders and loved his country. He was convicted on all counts: crimes against peace, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and conspiracy to commit these crimes. He was sentenced to death by hanging. But Göring had one final act of defiance. The night before his execution, he swallowed a cyanide capsule that he had somehow hidden from his guards. He denied the Allies the satisfaction of executing him. Even in death, he needed to be in control. So what did Hermann Göring actually do all day? He slept late, took drugs, changed into absurd uniforms, and stole art from murdered families. He hosted lavish parties while signing orders for mass murder. He lived in a fantasy world of luxury and power, disconnected from the suffering he helped create. He was vain, greedy, and monstrously evil, hiding behind a veneer of culture and sophistication. Behind the medals and the paintings was a man who enabled genocide, who built the machinery of terror, and who never once showed genuine remorse for any of it. A cautionary tale about how power, vanity, and moral bankruptcy can combine to create something truly horrible. What do you think made Göring so different from other Nazi leaders? Was it his vanity, his addiction, or something deeper? Let us know in the comments. When you think of Nazi Germany's propaganda machine, one name stands above all others: Joseph Goebbels. But what did the man behind the lies actually do each day? Did he spend every hour crafting speeches and spreading hatred? Or was there something even darker hiding behind his carefully controlled public image? What does a day in the life of one of history's most dangerous propagandists really look like? Let's pull back the curtain and see the man who turned deception into an art form. Joseph Goebbels woke up early, much earlier than Adolf Hitler. Unlike the Führer, who slept until late morning, Goebbels was usually awake by 7 a.m., sometimes even earlier. He believed in discipline and structure, and his mornings reflected that belief. The first thing he did each day was read. Not just any reading. He consumed newspapers from across Germany and even foreign press from countries like Britain, France, and the United States. He wanted to know what the world was saying about Nazi Germany, and more importantly, what they were saying about him. While still in bed or over breakfast, Goebbels would flip through page after page, his mind already working on how to twist the news, how to respond, how to shape the narrative. He kept detailed notes in the margins, circling stories that angered him or inspired new propaganda angles. This wasn't casual reading, it was reconnaissance. He was hunting for weaknesses in enemy morale, looking for stories he could manipulate, and scanning for any criticism of the Nazi regime that needed to be crushed. Breakfast itself was simple. Goebbels ate lightly, usually bread, butter, jam, and coffee. He wasn't interested in long, drawn-out meals like Hitler. He wanted to get to work. By 8:30 or 9 a.m., he was already dressed in one of his perfectly tailored suits, his hair slicked back, his appearance meticulous. Goebbels was short in stature and had a limp from a childhood illness, something that had haunted him his entire life. He overcompensated for this with obsessive attention to how he looked and how he was perceived. Every detail mattered to him: his clothes, his posture, even the way he entered a room. By mid-morning, Goebbels was at his office in the Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda in Berlin. This was his kingdom. From this building, he controlled nearly every piece of information that entered the minds of millions of Germans. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, films, books, art, music, nothing escaped his reach. He had created a system where truth didn't matter. Only the story he wanted people to believe mattered. His mornings were filled with meetings. Editors from major newspapers would arrive to receive their daily instructions. Goebbels didn't just suggest what to write. He commanded it. He told them which stories to print on the front page, which ones to bury, and which ones to ignore completely. He decided how to frame every event, every battle, every speech. If Germany lost a battle, he would spin it as a strategic retreat. If civilians were suffering, he would blame it on Jewish conspirators or foreign enemies. He was a master at controlling the message, and he did it with chilling precision. But Goebbels wasn't just managing the press, he was orchestrating hatred. One of the most horrifying parts of his daily routine was his active role in promoting anti-Semitic propaganda. He personally oversaw the creation of films, posters, and radio programs designed to dehumanize Jewish people. He commissioned movies like The Eternal Jew, a vile propaganda film that portrayed Jews as subhuman parasites. He approved cartoons and children's books that taught young Germans to hate. He wrote speeches that blamed Jews for every problem Germany faced, from economic struggles to military losses. And he didn't just approve these materials from a distance, he was intimately involved. Goebbels would review scripts line by line, editing dialogue to make it more venomous. He would watch rough cuts of films and demand they be made more extreme. He attended rallies where he whipped crowds into frenzies of hatred, his voice rising and falling with calculated emotion, his words carefully chosen to ignite rage and fear. He knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't ignorance or blind loyalty. It was deliberate, methodical evil. Around midday, Goebbels would often meet with filmmakers, actors, and artists. He saw himself as a cultured man, someone who appreciated art and cinema. He loved movies and fancied himself a film critic and creative director. He would give notes on Nazi propaganda films as if he were running a Hollywood studio, obsessing over lighting, music, and pacing. He wanted propaganda to be entertaining, to be seductive, so that people would absorb the lies without even realizing they were being manipulated. But behind this veneer of culture was something sinister. Goebbels used his position to exploit young actresses. He was a serial adulterer who leveraged his power to coerce women into relationships. He would promise roles in films, threaten to destroy careers, and manipulate vulnerable women who had no ability to say no. His wife Magda knew about many of these affairs, and their marriage was filled with tension and dysfunction. Yet publicly, they presented themselves as the ideal Nazi family, devoted, loyal, and pure. It was all a lie, just like everything else Goebbels produced. Lunch was usually taken at his office or at home, and it was during these quieter moments that Goebbels would write in his diary. He kept incredibly detailed journals throughout his entire life, documenting his thoughts, his schemes, and his views on the war. These diaries reveal a man who was deeply insecure, obsessed with Hitler's approval, and consumed by jealousy toward other Nazi leaders. He constantly worried about his standing, about whether Hitler still valued him, about whether others were gaining more influence. Despite his power, Goebbels was never truly confident. He needed validation, and he got it by proving his loyalty through ever more extreme acts of propaganda and cruelty. In the afternoons, Goebbels would return to meetings or spend time preparing for speeches. He was one of the Nazi Party's most effective public speakers, second only to Hitler himself. He understood rhythm, emotion, and psychological manipulation. He knew when to whisper and when to shout, when to pause for effect, and when to unleash a torrent of words. His speeches were performances, carefully rehearsed and devastatingly effective. As the war dragged on and Germany began losing, Goebbels' role became even darker. He pushed the concept of total war, urging every German to sacrifice everything for the Nazi cause. He created propaganda that glorified death, that told soldiers and civilians alike that dying for Hitler was the highest honor. He spread lies about miracle weapons that would turn the tide of the war, giving false hope to a desperate population. He continued to blame Jews even as they were being systematically murdered in concentration camps. Camps whose existence he was fully aware of and supported. Evenings often found Goebbels either at home with his Sykes children, whom he used as propaganda tools, presenting them in films and photos as the perfect Aryan family, or attending events with Hitler and other top Nazis. He loved being close to Hitler, loved the prestige and the access. He would sit through Hitler's long, rambling monologues, nodding and agreeing, always the loyal servant. But in his diary, he sometimes expressed frustration with Hitler's decisions, though he would never dare voice these thoughts. Goebbels rarely went to bed before midnight. He would spend late hours reading, writing, or watching films. Even his leisure time was soaked in propaganda. He couldn't separate himself from his work because he had become his work. A man whose entire identity was built on lies, manipulation, and hatred. By the end of the war, as the Nazi regime collapsed, Goebbels remained fanatically loyal. In the final days in Hitler's bunker, while others tried to flee or negotiate surrender, Goebbels stayed. And in one of history's most horrifying acts, he and his wife Magda poisoned their 6 children, ranging in age from 4 to 12, before taking their own lives. He chose murder and suicide over facing the consequences of his crimes. So what did Joseph Goebbels actually do all day? He woke early, read obsessively, and spent every waking hour weaving lies, spreading hatred, and manipulating millions. He didn't just support the Nazi regime, he gave it a voice, a message, and a false reality that led to unimaginable suffering. Behind the speeches and the films was a man who knew exactly what he was doing and did it anyway. Heinrich Himmler wasn't a loud dictator shouting from balconies. He looked more like a school teacher than the head of the SS, a quiet man with round glasses who drank warm milk, raised chickens, and liked books about herbs. But what did his days really look like? Did he spend his mornings thinking about his health while signing death orders in the afternoon? Did the man who liked gardening also make time to visit camps? And how could someone so caught up in small routines be in charge of killing millions? So what did Heinrich Himmler actually do all day? Heinrich Himmler's day began with a strict sense of order. He woke around 7 a.m., not as a soldier ready for battle, but as a weak man tied to his habits. He had stomach problems, allergies, and poor eyesight, things that made him seem more like a worried school teacher than the man behind mass killings. Yet from this fragile figure came some of the deadliest orders in modern times. His morning showed many strange contrasts. He avoided meat and ate porridge, fruit, and warm milk for breakfast. He hated smoking so much that SS men were not allowed to do it near him. And while he saw himself as the protector of a new Aryan race, he trusted herbal teas and natural cures, believing they kept him clean and strong. His bedroom and study were full of books on old stories, herbs, and ancient German symbols. Before starting work, he might read a medieval tale or a farmer's calendar, feeding his strange interest in myths and blood purity. In these quiet hours, he looked less like a fighter and more like a monk of his own dark order. But the peace was false. Once he put on his SS uniform and entered his office, he was faced with papers filled with train schedules, prisoner counts, and medical reports. His calm mornings always ended with the business of death. Himmler's breakfast table was as neat as the rest of his life. A cup of herbal tea, a slice of bread with honey, maybe some cottage cheese or boiled potatoes. He avoided meat and alcohol, believing that staying away from them kept his mind sharp and his body clean. He even told others that living simply at the table showed true discipline of the soul. But while he drank his warm milk, the desk beside him filled with orders for shootings and deportations. On some mornings, he read reports from the Einsatzgruppen units describing thousands of executions in Eastern Europe, written in such plain, office-like words they could almost be mistaken for accounting notes. To Himmler, these weren't crimes but cleansing for the Reich's future. One of his strange habits was his hatred of cigarette smoke. He believed smoking weakened the German people, so he banned SS men from smoking in uniform and told women not to marry smokers. Yet just outside his window, the smoke rising into the sky was not from tobacco but from crematoria, a bitter truth he ignored. He often ate in silence, speaking little, already thinking about schedules, orders, and the meetings ahead. His food was plain, almost like that of a monk, but his power was far from simple. The contrast was sharp. Here was a man who worried over the purity of milk while planning the murder of millions. His breakfast ended not with prayer, but with another page of death. By mid-morning, Himmler was deep in paperwork. His office, clean and quiet, looked less like that of a dictator and more like that of a clerk. He worked best in silence, pen in hand, reading page after page of typed reports. These were not Hitler's loud speeches or generals' war maps. They were numbers, lists, and schedules. But behind those numbers were real people, disappearing by the thousands. One folder might list train times, how many cattle cars left Warsaw, how many arrivals reached Auschwitz. Another folder held notes on forced sterilization experiments, written up as if they were science projects. Himmler signed them quickly, almost without thought. His danger did not come from anger or shouting, but from the cold way he treated mass killing as nothing more than routine work. He often marked the margins with small notes. Historians have found places where he underlined numbers, asked about efficiency, or suggested expanding a camp. His need for order showed even here. Every killing had to be neat, counted, and filed away. On some days, his aides brought him even darker reports. Firing squads, prisoners shot while trying to escape, resistance fighters tortured. Himmler read them without pause, as if they were farm reports, part of his daily duty. This was his morning's work, not battles, not speeches, but endless sheets of death turned into numbers. When he set down his pen, it was not only ink on the page, it was lives, erased with his signature. Every so often, Himmler left his desk to see the results of his orders for himself. A motorcade carried him through guarded gates, where SS officers stood stiffly in line, waiting for the Reichsführer's inspection. He walked slowly in polished boots, his round glasses shining, his face calm and distant. Unlike Hitler, who stayed away from the camps, Himmler insisted on visiting. He wanted to see the system of death with his own eyes. At Auschwitz, people remembered him watching executions without showing emotion. Prisoners were hanged in front of him, guards shot people at close range. Himmler stayed steady, even curious. Once in Minsk, he turned pale at a mass shooting. But instead of stopping it, he ordered gas chambers to make the killings more efficient and less stressful for the SS. Even his moments of weakness led to new ways of cruelty. Sometimes he toured the barracks, asking camp leaders about rations, work numbers, or how sick prisoners were handled. To him, it was just management. On certain days, he even brought his family along, as if a camp visit could sit next to a family trip. What survivors noticed most was his coldness. He rarely shouted, rarely lost control. He treated extermination like farming, as if people were crops or animals to be managed. To Himmler, the camps were not horror. They were order at work. And when he left, the guards knew. The Reichsführer had seen it all, and he approved. Himmler liked to think of himself as a supporter of science, but the science he pushed was built on blood. Through his orders, camps became labs where prisoners were used as test subjects. He approved freezing experiments to see how long a person could survive in icy water. He ordered research into sterilization, looking for ways to stop whole groups of people from having children. Diseases like malaria, typhus, and tuberculosis were injected into healthy prisoners, all under the claim of medical progress. Doctors like Sigmund Rascher wrote directly to Himmler with detailed reports. Himmler not only read them, but often wrote back, asking questions and telling them to continue. He wasn't bothered by the cruelty. He wanted results. When Rascher drowned men in ice water at Dachau until their hearts stopped, Himmler asked whether warming methods could save German pilots who crashed into the sea. He turned medicine into a weapon. He praised doctors like Karl Clauberg, who tested chemical sterilization on women in Ravensbrück, calling them pioneers of racial hygiene. To Himmler, the victims weren't people. They were material, tools for the Reich's future. In his eyes, these crimes were not murders, but studies serving a higher purpose. He blurred the line between doctor and killer, treating death as data. For Himmler, knowledge mattered only if it served his beliefs. For the prisoners, it meant torture masked as science. By early afternoon, Himmler returned to the work that defined him most: paperwork. His office was filled with maps, train schedules, and typed notes. Where others might see boring details, he saw the structure of power. Sitting calmly at his desk, he went over deportations, work quotas, and extermination schedules as if they were parts of a puzzle only he could solve. Railways were often the main topic. How many trains could be taken from military use to send Jews east? Could more cattle cars be packed without slowing deliveries? These were the questions Himmler asked again and again. A man too weak for the front line had found his war in files and meetings. Afternoons also brought talks about Zyklon B shipments, the poison that turned gas chambers into tools of mass murder. Reports from Auschwitz and Majdanek came to him often, describing how capacity had gone up, how processing was now faster. Himmler read them not as human tragedy, but as signs of better efficiency. What made him most dangerous was not anger or wild speeches, but his calmness. He could discuss extermination in the same tone another man might use to talk about a harvest. When meetings ended, he left behind notes, orders, and signatures that kept the killing system running smoothly. For Himmler, an afternoon at the office was not boring routine. It was the quiet heartbeat of a machine built for death. As daylight faded, Himmler often slipped into another world, one of symbols, rituals, and old myths. To most people, he looked like a stiff clerk in glasses, but in private, he was drawn to the occult, believing the SS was more than an army. To him, it was a knightly order meant to shape history. At the center of this dream was Wewelsburg Castle, which he turned into a kind of spiritual base. Its rooms were filled with runes and swastikas, and a crypt was set up for ceremonies modeled on medieval knights. Himmler saw himself as a grand master, and the SS as warrior monks on a holy mission. He even ordered studies of his officers' family trees, trying to trace their Aryan blood back for generations, as if ancestry itself carried magic. He filled shelves with books on astrology, herbs, and Germanic legends. To him, ancient tribal sagas were not just stories but plans for the Reich's future. He even imagined the SS creating a new faith, one that could replace Christianity with rituals tied to blood and soil. One of his strangest ideas was the hunt for relics. He sent teams to Tibet, the Caucasus, even Spain, searching for objects that could prove Aryan greatness. He thought archaeology might back up Nazi myths. This was not harmless fantasy. His obsession with purity and mystical destiny fed straight into real policies of mass murder. Behind the tidy paperwork was a man who believed killing itself was part of a sacred mission. As the day came to a close, Himmler often moved from signing death orders to the comfort of writing letters. His private correspondence showed the strange split in his life. On the same day he approved deportations, he wrote tender notes to his wife, Margaret, and affectionate letters to his mistress, Hedwig Pothast. To Margaret, he wrote about family life, health cures, and even gardening. He sometimes sent pressed flowers, as if the man running Europe's largest killing system was just a husband worried about roses. To Hedwig, with whom he had 2 children, his words grew softer still. He used pet names, shared warmth, and showed a private kind of love, proof he could care deeply, but only within his own small circle. The The contrast was extreme. In the morning, he might approve freezing experiments that killed prisoners. In the evening, he told Margaret how chamomile tea calmed his stomach. He once signed an order sending thousands to Auschwitz, then minutes later wrote cheerfully about raising chickens. Himmler took pride in keeping these worlds apart. To him, there was no conflict. The murder of millions and the raising of his daughter Gudrun were simply different duties. His pen worked just as steadily in both roles, one for killing, one for family affection. It was this smooth blend of cruelty and domestic life that made him so chilling. He could move from genocide to gentle words without pause. Dinner in Himmler's world was not rich or fancy. He preferred plain meals, vegetables, potatoes, milk, bread. Meat was rare and alcohol even rarer. He often spoke about healthy living, saying the SS should show discipline in both body and spirit. But the talk around his table was far from pure. Meals with his close circle often became planning sessions for the final solution. Between bites of boiled potatoes, Himmler spoke calmly about deportation quotas, building progress at extermination camps, or the need for more guards. His quiet voice turned horror into routine business. Those at the table knew not to question him. His calm authority carried more weight than Hitler's fiery speeches. People noticed he disliked greed at the table. He wanted his officers lean, clean, and strict in their habits. Yet he had no problem with them running mass killings. His crusade against smoking looked absurd when compared with his approval of crematoria smoke rising across occupied Europe. At times, he dined with officers just back from the East. Over soup and bread, they reported shootings and gassings, while Himmler listened closely, asking about efficiency and morale. Dinner was not a break from his work, it was simply a part of it. The mood was cold and distant. Food filled the body, but talk at the table fueled ideology. For Himmler, even dinner was a time to fine-tune the machinery of death, served not on plates but in the orders he gave his SS. By nightfall, Himmler settled into quiet routines that made him seem almost normal. He disliked staying up late and often went to bed by 10 p.m. His evenings were spent with books, Nordic sagas, folklore, or guides on herbal medicine. Sometimes he read reports from SS researchers on Germanic history, believing he was rebuilding a lost spiritual order. To him, the Reich was not just politics, but destiny, shaped by myth and blood. Unlike Hitler, who paced and ranted into the night, Himmler was calm and steady in private. He might write in his diary, copy down herbal recipes, or plan changes for Wewelsburg Castle, the temple he imagined for the SS. His notes rarely mentioned the killing he directed during the day. It was as if he lived in two worlds, one of quiet family life, the other of mass death. He slept without trouble. There are no signs of nightmares, no hints of guilt. He thought of himself as a soldier doing his duty, even a protector of his people. When he closed his eyes, he did not see the dead. He saw only the dream of a pure nation. This is what made Himmler so chilling. His days were not wild or frenzied, but ruled by order and belief. He was not a madman screaming with rage. He was a man who thought murder was duty and genocide was destiny. At night, the Reichsfuhrer set aside his glasses, folded his hands, and went to sleep without remorse. So what did Heinrich Himmler actually do all day? Rose early, obsessed over health and routine, and turned mass murder into paperwork. He toured camps, pushed medical experiments, and spoke of extermination as if it were ordinary office work. What do you think is more terrifying? A dictator who kills in anger, or a bureaucrat who kills with calm efficiency? Tell us in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe for more deep dives into history, and hit the bell so you never miss an upload. See you in the next one.